In this video, I want to give you a kind of thumbnail sketch of the book Significant Other, not chapter by chapter, but maybe just a few bullet points that might help you as you read. I wrote this book because I think the term church is at some levels problematic. Now, when I write, I'm not writing against something, but I am wanting to explore other possibilities. I'm aware sometimes our language can be, for example, oh, I'm in church, or another person say, I'm outside of church. And by what they mean is they're inside a recognized church setup, church construct, they attend a regular meeting at a certain place at a certain time, etc., or that for whatever reason that is not their context. I think the use of the term church for that is very limiting with regard to the meaning. Therefore, as I say elsewhere, I want to use the term ecclesia throughout. It's a Greek word which our Bibles translate as church, but it has a very long history, both in terms of what's called the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures, and also in terms of the Roman world. The Greek word ecclesia within the Roman world was a well-known word. It was not a religious word. It was actually a political word. And I think that aspect is very, very important. So part of what I want to do is to empower those who are seeking to pursue a path that they believe is the right one for them, that maybe has taken them outside of what many people would term church. They don't go to church certainly on a regular basis. That does not mean, from my reading of scripture, that they're not in church, because that is a much bigger meaning. So the chapter authorized label, I try to address that, whereby it's not legitimate to give the name church only to something that can say we are a local church, and then to give the label para church to something that does not fit that bill. I think we have to probe a lot deeper than that if we're to be faithful. Part of where I go in the book is trying to track the journey of Israel. And in doing this, I think it's quite important because we can see how Israel fell from her calling. And her calling is related to the choosing of God. The choosing of God does not determine Israel, or all those in Israel are saved and all Gentiles are damned. Uh, that is something we impose on the meaning. Salvation, or being chosen, being elect, is for a purpose, and it was always for the purpose of blessing the entire world. In terms of eternal destiny, it's something very much secondary. It does not feature at the visible level, if I put it like that, when we use the term Israel, or I believe in that sense when we use the term church, because church carries on the mission of Israel. Or maybe I should put it this way: Jesus fulfilled, brought to a conclusion the mission of Israel that it had failed on, and as the true Israel, initiated a movement to continue that work. In other words, it's not that the church replaces Israel, but the church is incorporated into Christ, who is the Israel of God, the true Israel, the one who came to fulfill Israel's destiny and humanity's destiny. Hence, he's not just Israel renewed, he is also Adam renewed. He is the second Adam. So I try to track the trajectory in Israel. A very key point is where they choose to be like one of the other nations. So give us a king so that we can be like one of the other nations. Now, prior to that, but after that, you can see how there is a fall from their position, whereby you come to the time of Christ. And I believe that's the heart meaning, or the root meaning of what Paul says, the fullness of time. There's no hope for the world, never was. There's no hope for Israel. Therefore, there is now no hope for the world. The redeeming nation now needs to be redeemed. Hence, the gospel is the power of God to salvation, first for the Jews. also for the Gentiles, is what Paul says in Romans chapter 1. So I tried to track that journey. Important parts along the way probably are the exile. The exile is 597, the key exile, 597 BC, when the kingdom has already divided, north and south. And the northern kingdom's 10 tribes have already disappeared with the Assyrian invasion. And the southern kingdom of Judah, the tribe of David, with the true king, David and all those who come from David, of course, is taken into exile in 597. That's the time when something really shifts, understandably so, something really shifts in the life of Israel. They move away from what I would call a seasonal life. They're an agricultural community, and they celebrate seasons and festivals. Three very key ones. The festival of Passover. We were in Egypt, but now we're out of Egypt. We're away from the dominion of Egypt. They celebrated Pentecost, which was the time they celebrated God giving them the law. We really are marked out as being the people of God. And they then celebrate tabernacles, how God lived among them, past tense and future tense, and they built these tabernacles, these temporary dwelling places to indicate how temporary they are and how God comes to dwell among them. Those three festivals kept the big story alive. So it kept them reminding, who are we? Why are we here? Who are we in relationship to? And what are we here for? When they go into exile, it's a major blow. They, in their own words, we can't sing our songs, not in a strange land. And they hung up their harps on the willow tree. Jeremiah, who is quite a unique prophet, unique in his vision way beyond, I would say, national Israel and their survival. He said, now you're in exile, buy land, get into the land, buy houses. If the land prospers, if the city prospers, now Babylon is their enemy. And he says, if Babylon prospers, you will prosper. And I think that is incredible. Now, at the same time, what Israel does, understandably so, is develop the synagogue system. Weekly meetings where they meet around the scrolls, the holy book, helps them, I guess, it helps them keep their identity in a foreign land. But I think what it does, it moves them away from a real mission orientation to a survival mentality. And I suggest that that is very much what has shaped our view of church. It is something to do with survival. Now, jumping ahead, and I'm trying to give you a thumbnail sketch here. Ecclesia, the Roman use of it, is to do with what we might term today the city council. The people who had authority to shape their city or their region or their city state so that it might carry the values of Rome. Paul came, and what he wanted to do was put into each of those places, he wanted to establish in each of those places an ecclesia. Same word, very provocative. It is unmistakable not to think that what he has in mind is something deeply, deeply political. Now, by political, I don't mean starting a political party, he's left wing, he's right wing, or those kind of language, but something that was there that took on responsibility for the shaping of that region and for the implementing of a, let me suggest, like an environment, establishing, protecting an environment whereby the values of heaven could flourish. Something deeply, deeply political. And that's why throughout the book, I try to emphasize the whole idea that the church is a movement. It is not there primarily for one another. That is a very key aspect, but not primary. It is there for the sake of the world. Same as Israel was there, not to simply preserve their identity, but in order that the world might come, the nations, the Gentiles might come to their maturity. So that's where I try to take us in the book. I think it takes us ultimately into a discussion that I frame this way. Are we, in our understanding, are we pre-Pauline? Haven't even grasped what Paul was about. So in that sense, we're pre-Pauline. We put the label church on it, but is it really pre-Pauline? Or rather, is it really Pauline? And all we've got is something that is pre-Pauline, something that we think is Pauline, but if it doesn't carry the missional aspect, which is a transformation of the world, not simply missional in the sense of presenting a narrow gospel to people in order that they might respond and pray the sinner's prayer, but something much, much bigger than that. Are we pre-Pauline? And then the second thing I think that we will be provoked in our discussion is to think, and should we actually be, in one sense, post-Pauline? In other words, Paul addresses his society. Our society is not his society. Should we look beyond simply trying to draw a straight line? What's the structure of ecclesia? What's the structure of church that Paul had? Look, now we're a biblical church. And in that, fail to be biblical because of pre-Pauline. And should we be thinking this is what Paul was doing for the reasons that he was doing it? Therefore, we are going to think about something alternative to that. And that in that sense, we should be post-Pauline. That's where some of the discussion will take us. And I look forward to the discussion as it unfolds over the coming weeks.